Hey guys, Brian Hilliard here, author of the best-selling book, Networking Like a Pro, and I am here with my good friend Bill Davis. He is a business coach and owner of Team Nimbus. Bill, thanks so much for stopping by.
It's my pleasure, Brian.
Awesome. You know, we've known each other for a while, and obviously you're here in the Raleigh area, Raleigh, North Carolina. And you know, a lot of people, when they talk about coaching and they're talking about being a business coach, which obviously you are, people say, gosh, you know, there's business coaches all over the place, right? And they say, well, all right, Brian, what is it that would make Bill or anybody different? And I'm sure that's a question that you get asked all the time. So I'll start off, you know, when people think and potentially work with you, and we'll talk about how you work with them in a second, but what is it in your mind that kind of makes you different from, I always say, you can throw a rock and hit 3 other business coaches, including myself, like that's not a knock, right? Like you can throw a rock and hit 3 other marketing coaches, you know, on the way down. How do you tell people that it's differentiation?
I'll tell you, I think the thing that probably makes me most different, Brian, is a couple of things. One, I have a lot of experience in the area of acquiring clients, growing a business, putting together an organization, etc. So that's the first thing. The other thing, though, is I'm pretty daggone good at expressing things and sharing things in a way that people get it. And can go to action with it. So that's that second part really, I think, is my secret sauce. I don't market it, but when my clients react to me and what they get that's different, it frequently is expressed in that realm.
You know, that's interesting because a lot of times, and we're not throwing anybody under the bus, we're just talking, but you know, we're just talking. But you know, in other interactions with coaches who you engage with, who you've engaged with, who I've engaged with, who I'm sure people have engaged with, it's almost like there's this pixie dust component, right? Just kind of do what I say and then, I mean, I'm right with this. Just kind of do what I say and maybe it will work. And then there's also this component of, well, and again, not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but read these 5 books and, you know, implement it and hope for the best. But what you're saying is, I guess I'm asking, you're walking people through the process of getting them up and running and really implementing and getting more clients.
Exactly. Well, you know, the way I was taught to coach, that's the way I'll say it. My responsibility is not to teach. My responsibility as a coach is to have that individual be in action towards what they're trying to accomplish. They learn in the process. And so I draw a distinction between teaching, which is literally telling them what to do, and operating with them in a way that supports them to move towards what they're trying to accomplish. So oftentimes what I think is kind of my secret sauce of having people see something frequently is to create the insight that puts them in action. They may not learn a thing. You with me?
Per se.
And it may not be something they don't know.
Again, I understand.
But in the insight, they see it in a way that puts them in action. The action that they weren't in before.
So it's almost like, and I'm asking, it's almost like unlocking their potential is what I kind of hear.
That's a great way. Of describing it.
Because what happens is, you know, when you're working with people, and we're talking about some of the people that you've worked with, obviously we're not naming names or anything, but just in terms of examples, you really work with business owners and you're really specializing in helping them bridge that, what we've called this implementation gap, where you are, you know, you have an idea, you have a vision, and then you have what that needs to, you know, getting into action, obviously, And from what I understand and what we've talked about and what you're really good at is you're good at working with business owners and getting from idea to action, which we've called this implementation gap.
That's exactly right, because coaching to me is about action, Results, I say this all the time in the program that I run, the 100 Days to Abundance program, is that results is a function of strategy and execution. And you got to have both. A good idea and know-how is necessary, but it ain't sufficient.
Right.
What is required is the action.
Okay.
And in fact, you and I both have seen people execute a bad idea well and produce some really outstanding results.
Commensurate with the level of the idea.
Exactly
because what happens is there's two types of people, in my opinion. There's the type of people who have the ideas and don't do anything, and that's fine. And that's, let's say, 70% of the American adult population.
At least.
Right. And I can't speak for other parts of the world. I'm talking about this country. And then there's the other group that are, have good ideas and or they have different ideas and they're just running the whole time. And it's interesting because I've worked with people, I'm sure you have too, where you're just like, boy, if we could just think for a second. And now people know, I'm a shoot first, ask questions later guy. I talk about sports all the time. If I were to characterize myself in foot, I am definitely the offensive coordinator. I am going to outscore you. I'm going to keep the ball the whole game if I can, and I'm just going to outscore you if I have to. Okay, but in terms of the evolution of my business, I realized that I had to have, continuing with that analogy, a little bit more of a defensive approach as well, which was using this comparison or this point, making this point. I had to think a little bit more. I had to stop a little bit more, and I think sometimes what happens is as business owners, pound, 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 and we just have these ideas, but we don't actually figure out how we want to implement them.
Yeah, I'd even say it this way, that it kind of falls in that conversation about being busy.
Okay, good point. I like this.
Versus being in action.
Right, or intentional.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And without question, yes, it requires thinking.
Right.
My experience, though, is the gap between people in business and people very successful in business.
Interesting.
Is not whether they think or not.
Right.
It's whether they act or not.
That's interesting.
And how they act. And so when you think about this thing about being busy, it's not unusual for solopreneurs and small business owners to, I'm going to use the word, be frantic. They do a lot of, or they do act a lot of the right things.
Right, do act, that's interesting.
The ones that really tend to win are the ones that go deep.
Right.
They do it in its totality, or they do a lot more of it so that they get the benefit of it.
Right. Okay? Interesting.
And I tell clients all the time, look, the key to small business success is to go deep, not wide.
Right.
To always, and this is something that I learned from beginning to look at what are the characteristics and success patterns of Inc. 5,000 business owners. Those businesses, those 5,000 businesses that are growing faster than all the rest. And one of the things that you learn in watching them is they don't do anything they don't have enough resource to do.
Okay, so they don't overcommit. I'm sorry, just stop.
No, go ahead. No, that's right.
They don't overcommit.
That's exactly right.
Or
if they don't have enough resource to do it, that's not the thing for them to do in their business. They do either one or two things. They do something that they have the resource to do and do it completely and well, or they accumulate the resource necessary to effectively execute whatever that plan or strategy is. What you don't see them doing is trying to do something with less resource than it really takes.
It's funny. I heard it explained to me this way: a disbursement of effort.
Yes.
That's not mine. I got that from somebody else.
That is it.
Yeah, it's a disbursement of effort, and what happens is, and then I'll tell you something else. You also probably know, our psychology friends have determined that a person gets more satisfaction from a completed single task than 3 half-done tasks.
That's right. In fact, Stephen Covey.
I was just about to go with that. We're going to go old school, right? 7 Habits? Yeah.
Did a study. I don't know exactly when it was, but it was looking at goal achievement. And I'm not going to get the percentages exactly right.
Yeah.
But the essence of the study was the more goals you have, the lower the probability
of getting them
that
all done.
you will achieve. No, that you will
some.
achieve even one of them.
Isn't that interesting?
That's exactly right. And so what it suggests is you focus on one or a very few things at a time.
Okay.
Now, I think the successful business owners pick what would make the most difference.
Right.
And at some level become, I'm going to use the word maniacal, become somewhat maniacal at getting that implemented.
Right.
The thing we miss is once it's done, it's done.
Right.
And it's there for us to build on.
I love that. And just to piggyback off of that, and then I'm going to ask you another question. I love that point that you made, which we lost it a little bit, but I want you guys to really get this. You implied a threshold value where a benefit was achieved, which doesn't necessarily have to be 100% done, but it's close.
Right.
Okay. Whatever. Let's say it's 100%. But there's a threshold value that it's not 50%. There's a threshold value, and that people then. So what's happening is when they're getting, I think you said frantic. When they're getting that frantic and dispersing their efforts, which is what I'm talking about, they're actually just let's say it's 70% or 80%. What they're doing is they're working all the way up to that 80%, no benefit, and then let's go back and let's say no benefit, and let's go back and do all that. But what you're doing is you're helping that bridge that implementation gap. So here's my question. What is it that, as a business owner, give us an example, if you don't mind, of maybe, and we don't have to name names or anything like that, but give us an example of a client or some type of situation where it's like, okay, Bill, they hired you to come in. They realized, listen, for whatever reason, the donuts aren't making themselves, okay? So what we have to do is we need you to come in and take care of this business. Walk us through how you're able to kind of assess a client like that and what you would give them as examples so these guys can come away with some good stuff.
So that's a great question, and it would start with an assessment. And what I'm looking at and for is one. Obviously, well, not obviously, but what's the result they're trying to accomplish? Then the second thing I'm going to want to do is, after I determine what they want to accomplish, where they are, I'm looking for what would have the most leverage on accomplishing that result. Because I want to focus on working on one or two things at a time.
And I'm going to stop you for a second because that's a term that they may or may not be familiar with. Obviously, everyone knows what leverage means, but what you're talking about, what Bill's talking about, is John Maxwell the way it was explained to me was John Maxwell said you can add to your business or you can multiply in your business. Adding would be like, okay, so if you have 5 rocks here and I would add and I would say I'm building up the rocks and I'd say, Bill, do you mind helping me take the rocks up? That's adding. Okay, leveraging or multiplying, leverage is the word you use, is, okay, you know what, let me take 10 minutes to build a wheelbarrow, and that way I can get 3 of these rocks up myself. It's not adding more time to it. So I just want to get that point.
That's very good.
I just want to get that point. You're talking about what is, and then you can pick right back up, what and where is the most leverage for getting, and you didn't say this, but you implied it, the most impact on my business. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think that's a good point.
And so once I determine that leverageable thing, that's where I'm gonna make a proposal that we do the work. And the idea obviously is get the big rocks first. And then that gives you an ability to solve those other challenges, and more importantly, not only gives you the ability to solve those other challenges, but in solving the other challenges creates the ability for them to have impact or effect. Because if you don't have the lever,
that's another good point.
If you don't have the lever, you can fix something else, but it won't impact. It won't show up.
So give yourself, what I heard you say is not only figure out where the leverage is, what we just talked about, but also give yourself a chance this is the terminology I use, give yourself a chance to be successful, right? Let's give ourselves enough time to run after it's done to be able to do that. You know, one of the things, so people sometimes ask me, they're like, Brian, how do you figure out what to do? Like, how do you know, there's a million things to do. And people ask me this. And I don't know what they think I do. But I'll tell you, which is, you know, the idea is like it's a perfect example. We were talking about, I'm building I launched a book, and you know this, okay? And I'm building out a funnel on Facebook and doing some different things, and that's fine. And I was walking the dog, I think it was yesterday. I was walking the dog.
Some of the best ideas.
Right. I was walking the dog yesterday, and now the way my day is structured is I usually do like a power hour initially. So I'm an early morning, so I'm up at 6:15 at the desk at 7, and I do a power hour till like around 8:30, maybe 9 o'clock, depends how I feel. And I'm walking the dog at 9 o'clock. So then I did what I needed to do, and then I had two choices of what I could do. But I knew that I only had one spot to do it in. Like, there was not going to be enough time to do both.
There you go.
And I'm telling you, this is my thought process. I'm walking the dog. I'm like, okay, what do you think the best thing is to do now? And it was like build a blog. I remember this. I had to either build a blog or I had to do something. It was something to do with the funnel. There was some loose ends. But they were both going to take about 90 minutes. And there was only one block of 90 minutes left, and because the next after that was 5 clients. There wasn't any more 90 minutes that day. And I remember walking the dog, and I actually wound up vacillating. I wound up deciding to do the 90 minutes loose ends. You know why? Because it's the point that you just made and we were talking about, because I didn't think about it as like a threshold value, which I love that. But what I thought about it was satisfaction. I'm going to feel better doing these points than I will starting this over here. You know, so for me, a lot of times, I just look at it in terms of what's going to help me feel better.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And how I'm going to be able to get that satisfaction.
That's right.
All right, so we're talking about implementation. That's a good example. So what I heard you say is assessment, leverage, action, and then obviously your value proposition in this, I would believe, is a lot of times it's just seeing something different with a different pair of eyes.
Yeah, that's what I bring, is a different perspective.
Right, perspective. I couldn't think of it.
And I will tell you, perspective is the thing that a business owner can only bring one of.
Right, by definition.
Exactly right. And that perspective will limit the application of their experience, knowledge, talent. The business owner that makes themselves open to or access other perspectives, then they get to apply that talent, that knowledge, that et cetera, from the other perspective also. So it gives them a greater utilization. So you may know I run peer advisory groups.
Right, actually I do know that.
Everybody shows up for accountability.
Right.
Everybody wins from the varied perspectives.
Right, right.
And that's the real value, because, you know, you can get accountability a number of ways.
Right.
But the only way you can get multiple or additional perspectives is you've got to be in some process that includes others, that they can have the perspective.
Right.
I'd even say this about perspective. We tend to always be in pursuit of knowledge.
Okay.
What will drive us to action and give us a greater ability to apply whatever knowledge we've got are other perspectives.
That's interesting.
You know, and if you think about it, knowledge today with all the capabilities. It's easy to get.
Commodity.
It's almost a commodity. That's exactly right. Perspective,
wisdom
is what we should.
Insight.
Is what I'm going to suggest. The most successful business owners value and seek out, and that creates competitive wherewithal and advantage. As opposed to knowledge.
That's interesting, you know, and if you don't, you know, I watch a lot of movies on Netflix. Vantage Point, by the way. I don't know if you've seen that, Matthew Fox. Okay, so what happens is it's different. It's shot from different perspectives. So they shoot someone goes down,
Yeah.
and they do the perspective from like 5 different people. The president, bullet, he just comes out. They do it from the police person, Forrest Whitaker's in it, from this, and it's all these different perspectives. And at the end, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this person was the one who did it. And it was really interesting because it's just like you said, the perspectives is what limits people. But with your experience, you're able to do that. So that brings me to the next natural question. Tell us a little bit about yourself, about your experience, what your background is, and how it is that, you've got, I think you're one of the few people who's been doing this as long as I have now, and that I'm aware of. I'm sure there are, but that I personally know.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I was going to say a little earlier, I was talking about this finding the point of leverage and all.
Yeah.
A lot of what I bring, I'm almost going to say I lucked into. My background is I spent 28 years in the telecom industry.
Okay.
Started out primarily in sales.
Okay.
And at the time I started, there was an approach to doing large account sales that I'll always remember the name of the course. It was called Systems Analysis and Approach.
Okay, sounds very clinical.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. What I got out of that though is that a business is just a collection of systems and processes.
Okay, I agree with that.
So you just you analyze. That's the way you look at it.
Right.
So, and that shaped a lot of what I bring forward today. But I've sold at every level.
Okay.
I've sold. I've been a sales manager. I've been a general manager of a sales and installation and maintenance operation. I've done marketing on at the industry level.
Right. And all this, and you're 45.
I wish I was. I've done a lot of what we called culture change work, organizational development work. That's really where I begin to move towards the coaching perspective. Right. I retired in 2000. Okay. I was way too young to quit working. I was 50, and so I started a coaching consulting business that has morphed into Team Nimbus. Right. But that's my background. The other thing in there that I probably left out is I did a good bit of quality implementation, quality work. That drives into my first approach. If I want you to buy something from me, I'm gonna start off doing an analysis, either out loud or in my head, looking for, if you would, what we used to call back in the old quality improvement days, what's the root cause?
I remember that. GE, when I worked for GE. What was that called? It was
Motorola. You remember the old fishbone analysis?
I don't. I was actually going to say the black belt.
Okay, that's exactly right.
The black belt, Motorola, and I got to remember what they call it in the East. It's not Kaizen. It's something like that, but yeah.
Right. And all of those went together. You had black belt, you had Kaizen, you had.
It is Kaizen,
yes,
is it?
It is.
Oh, okay, cool. I thought it was either that or those are the people on like the Star Trek. I couldn't keep it track.
Absolutely. And so, to a large extent, that's another thing I think that differentiates me. Right. Is I have a long and substantial background that I bring to small business.
Okay.
Well, so that's
interesting. Well, let me wrap it up with a question that I always like to ask people because I think it's a good one. If you were able to go back and I take a look at this as kind of like lessons learned. Okay, so if you were to go back and let's say go back to 2000, you said that's when you started. Okay. Right. If you could give one lesson to yourself that you've learned now and you were able to somehow go through the space-time continuum and go back to 2000, what would that be? Like, what would you say to your former self, earlier self, based off of an experience? Maybe it's a book you've read, or what would you say?
I'm going to use something that's very cliche-ish, and that is start with the end in mind.
Right.
Many business owners, myself included,
probably me too,
was very focused on what the start looked like.
Right. I'm with you.
And so everything I did and thought was around starting the business. I didn't spend much time that would have been beneficial if I had thinking in terms of what business I was building.
Interesting.
Okay. I was very and another way I'd say it is we are overly preoccupied with making the next sale.
Yep.
Versus being preoccupied with building the business.
The long game.
That's exactly right. And what happens is we think they're the same thing.
And they're not.
They absolutely
And sometimes
are not.
they're mutually exclusive.
That's exactly right. Sales is an operational thing. It's another transaction in the business. Building the business is a very different proposition. It is more about identifying and ushering the opportunities to the door of the business than it is converting the opportunity.
And that's good stuff, Bill, because that's almost like, and don't let me speak for you, I'm asking, it sounds like you've almost taken that approach and manifested that into a business that you were then teaching other people.
That is true. The whole Team Nimbus businesses revolves around what we call the Team Nimbus client acquisition system, or the woodpile system. And it is the critical business success factors in the small business context. Okay, and that's exactly right. I mean, that's the model I work with all of my clients on and around. And most of them come to me and they think that what I'm going to call the sales funnel, sales process is the entire spectrum of client acquisition. Okay. And so I work with them around I'm going to call it a more comprehensive, but still small business model that captures and accounts for all of what it takes to acquire clients and as a result to build a business.
And that's so interesting because it's obviously we're coming back to the sales, we're coming back to the implementation, we're coming back to the perspective, we're coming back to the experience. And these are all things that obviously people have gotten when working with you, at least that's what I'm getting out of this, and that part of the problem is, and I talk about this myself, part of the problem is sometimes just getting out of our own way.
True.
Okay. And that was actually one of my more popular podcasts, interestingly enough. I was at the airport and I was talking about it and I just did it. But getting out of your own way. And one of the things that you really want to do, and I know we talked about this before with implementation, is you want to really talk about making sure that it's easy for people to do, that you give it a track to run on. These are things that we've talked about that if someone's listening and they're like, oh yeah, you guys are talking about this, but how do I actually do it in my, everyday thing? Well, make it easy for you to do stuff. Create some systems that's easy to follow. There's two ways to go through life, easy and hard. Try easy first, and then apply that to your business. And somebody like yourself with your breadth of experience and perspective and overall skill set, just being able to come in is, I'm sure, a breath of fresh air for a lot of people.
Well, that's the way I hope they see me.
I think so. We're going to say that. That's our story. That's right. And we're going to stick with it. Well, all right, guys. Well, that over there is Bill Davis. I am Brian Hilliard, and we are just saying so long, take care, and thank you so much for your time.